our very own David Leuthold. Dr. David Leuthold is MU Emeritus Professor of Political Science. He is also the author of books on elections in Missouri and California. During his retirement, he taught Osher classes for more than 12 years, focusing especially on elections and public policies. Welcome, David.
Oh, thank you very much, Kathy. All right, the Boone County had 67% turnout, which compared with 70% turnout 4 years ago. So it's much as the same as the rest of the nation. The turnout was a little lower this year. About 40% of the votes in Boone County were cast before Election Day. The early vote was about 2-1 in favor of the Democrats. The Election Day vote was fairly evenly divided between the Republicans and the Democrats. Kamala Harris won Boone County with 54% of the vote, compared to 44% for Donald Trump. Kamala Harris ran behind Lucas Coons and David Weber, and Donald Trump ran behind Mike Kehoe, Vivek Malik, and Andrew Bailey. And so there's ordinarily a drop-off, but it does say something about each of the candidates, that in fact there were other candidates on the ballot who did better than they did. In Boone County, as you know, one close race was the District 2 County Commissioner race, where 4-term state representative Cherie Tolson Reich challenged incumbent Commissioner Janet Thompson, and Janet Thompson won 52% to 48%. Not a large margin, but it was very pleasing. The Circuit Court District 13 covers Boone and Callaway counties, and Boone County leans Democratic and Callaway County leans Republican. Callaway County voted 2-1 for Jesus Osete, the Republican candidate. Stephanie Morrell, the Democratic candidate, had a 56 to 44% margin in Boone County, and that was enough that she was able to win the judgeship 52% to 48%. When she becomes she was asking for a promotion. She is already a circuit court judge, and so she will be resigning her position, and the governor, probably Governor Kehoe, will be appointing a judge in her place, and I'm wondering if they may appoint Osete as the circuit court judge here. I think there was a good possibility of that. Let me turn to some of the statewide races. And as you know, in Missouri, Democratic votes come especially from St. Louis City and Kansas City, but also substantially from St. Louis County, suburban Jackson County, and from Boone County. The rest of the state votes Republican, although Democrats will gain substantial votes in places like Springfield and St. Joseph, and some votes here and there elsewhere in the state. Not surprisingly, Republicans won 6 of the congressional districts, and Democrats won 2, one in St. Louis and one in Kansas City. The districts were drawn to ensure those results. The only district that was at all close was Congressional District 2, which was especially in St. Louis County, where Ann Wagner won by 12 percentage points. Okay, then the Republicans won all of the statewide contests, just as they did in 2020 and 2016. To win the Republican nomination, you had to be suitable for endorsement by Donald Trump. And that is an indication clearly of how much Donald Trump has commandeered the Republican Party. Let me turn to some of the issues on the ballot. Amendment 2 to allow online betting in Missouri squeaked by with a margin of only 4,400 votes, was 50.07%. 50.07%. We will have online gambling under the rules proposed by the two major online betting firms. And so they've set it up so that they will pay the state what they think is an appropriate amount. There is a tax of 10%, but they also allow a lot of deductions, including they get to deduct the federal tax before they decide how, before they declare how much state tax they will pay. FanDuel and DraftKings spent $41 million to get their amendment on the ballot, and it passed. Caesars Entertainment spent $14 million in opposition, but pulled their television ads 3 weeks before the election. And I'm wondering why. Why did that happen that way? Why did they decide to pull their ads? If they had continued their ads, the opposition probably would have died. It was so close. But they didn't continue their ads after they spent $14 million in opposition. And so that's it. Interesting. The question is what happened behind the scenes there that they decided that they would not pull any. They would not run any more television ads against it. Speaking about gambling, let me go to Amendment 5, which would have allowed a casino on a gambling boat at the Lake of the Ozarks. This proposal was defeated, getting only 48% of the vote. The backer of this proposal, Bally's Corporation, had spent $6 million to get on the ballot and to promote the issue. The defeat of this proposal leaves the field open for the Osage Nation if they can get approval from the federal government. The Osage Reservation is in Oklahoma, but they say that this is their traditional area on the Osage River. And this is also a very attractive area to have a gambling casino. If they get approval, and approval has to come from the federal government, and they've been waiting for some time for it, they will negotiate with the state as to the tax rate that they will pay and the division of law responsibility for law enforcement. So I would assume that the negotiations would be that they would pay at the same rate as other casinos in the state. The big issue on the ballot, which drew more votes than any other issue, was abortion. Amendment 3 passed with 52% of the vote. You won't be surprised that it passed in St. Louis City, St. Louis County, Jackson County, and two of the counties near Kansas City, Clay County and Platte County, and Boone County. It came close to passing in Greene County, which is Springfield, Missouri, and it came close to passing in Saline County, which is Marshall and Arrow Rock, which surprised me. With strong opposition to this, we can expect that there will continue to be numerous court cases and a good chance that the legislature will put an anti-abortion issue on the ballot in 2 years. And if they do, I would expect that it'll be on the August 2026 election, which will probably have a higher Republican percentage than the general election. Abortion proposals also passed in New York, Maryland, Montana, Arizona, Nevada, and Colorado, all with higher percentages than Missouri. In Nebraska, Nebraska already has a 12-week ban, and they were asked to approve a ban until viability, and Nebraska rejected that. South Dakota gave an abortion proposal only 41% of the vote. Florida voted 57% for an abortion proposal, but the Florida legislature had headed that off by requiring 60% approval. In Missouri, the legislature tried to get a provision in there to require that it not only get a statewide majority, but it get a majority in 5 of the 8 congressional districts, which would probably, which they anticipated would kill it if it happened. The proposed amendment to allow court fees to pay pensions for sheriffs and county attorneys was voted down, getting only 39% of the vote. Hopefully, the legislature will decide to include sheriffs and county attorneys in an ongoing retirement plan. There is a retirement plan for county officials after they have served some number of years. I'm not sure what the number is, but the sheriffs and county attorneys were not included in that because they already had a retirement plan of their own. But the Supreme Court, Missouri Supreme Court, declared that it wasn't proper to be charging fees to people who were found guilty in court, to charge them an extra fee for the sheriffs and county attorneys. So the legislature had tried to put this on the ballot in hopes of making it constitutional, and they failed to do so, and so and now it's up to the legislature, and I think probably what will happen and what should happen is that the sheriffs and the prosecuting attorneys should be treated the same as the other county officials who become eligible for retirement after a certain period in office. The constitutional amendment to ban ranked choice voting received strong approval, 68% to ban ranked choice voting. I think that was helped in part by the ballot candy there, which said that only citizens could vote in the election, which was already the state law, but it was put in to help make sure that this was banned. This will mean that we will continue with provisions which increase the chance of extremists in office. The advantage of ranked choice voting, as I see it, in which people, in which if nobody has 50%, the lowest candidate, the candidate with the fewest votes, is dropped, and his second choices are distributed among the candidates. And this continues until some candidate gets 50% of the vote. And the argument is that where that has been tried, that that they're less likely to be electing extremists to the legislature because people need the second choice votes oftentimes. There is a process of approval voting in St. Louis, which will continue. The approval voting in St. Louis is a procedure in which in the primary election, voters can vote for any number of candidates that they wish. And then all votes are counted, but the two candidates with the highest number of votes participate in the general election. What was happening in St. Louis was that I think what was happening was that there were numerous black candidates, and they split the vote so much that two white candidates would be in the general election. And what this procedure is designed to do is to give the blacks an opportunity to settle on one candidate, so that there would presumably be one black candidate, one white candidate in the general election. Proposition A, increasing the minimum wage, passed easily, getting 58% of the vote. This will probably end up in court also. And the Missourian carried an article a couple of days ago saying that business and industrial groups are going to fight it. And since it is a proposition, the legislature can rescind it. It is a law. But the legislature, I note that the legislature did not rescind the previous minimum wage increases. If the legislature does rescind it, then there's a good possibility that we will see it come back as a constitutional amendment. And we will have, if it passes, an even longer constitution. We shouldn't have online betting in the Constitution, but the legislature couldn't agree on a proposal. So the proponents put it on the ballot, and they narrowly carried it. Okay, let me turn to the national. The Senate has shifted from Democrat to Republican. There is a shift of 4 seats. 3 of the seats were Republican states, which were still electing 1 Democratic senator, and that was Montana, West Virginia, and Ohio. The 4th seat was Pennsylvania, which was clearly a competitive state. Rather interesting, Democratic Senate candidates won the other swing states of Michigan, Wisconsin, Nevada, and Arizona. The Democratic senatorial candidates won all 4 of those. If Kamala Harris had been able to win those 4 states as the Democratic Senate candidates won, she still would have been 2 votes short in the Electoral College. On the other hand, in North Carolina, which did not have a Senate election this year, North Carolina elected a Democratic governor. And if Kamala Harris had been able to carry North Carolina as well as those states that Democratic Senate candidates carried, then she would have had enough Electoral College votes. One encouraging, I find encouraging aspect of the Senate is that Senator John Thune of South Dakota was selected to be majority floor leader. There was a last-minute push by Trump supporters to get support for Senator Rick Scott of Florida, but Senator Scott is not very popular among the Republican senators. The House has continued to be Republican, although by a very slim margin. It appears that the House will have a margin of 5 seats over the minimum that they have. But Matt Gaetz has already resigned, and so that has taken their margin down to 4, and the margin will fall to 2 when Elise Stefanik and Mike Waltz are appointed to cabinet positions by President Trump. But President Trump won't be inaugurated until the 20th of January, and so those 2 will continue to be members of the House until they are nominated by the president. So they'll be in for a while, but there will be probably a period of about 4 months in which there will be vacancies there, and the number, the majority of the Republicans in the House will be slimmer. I assume that Mike Johnson will continue as Speaker of the House. He seems to have solid support. He has to get 218 Republican congressmen to support him in the vote for Speaker, but I think at this point the Freedom Caucus is going to support him. I doubt there will be defections like 2 years ago. Which brings us to the presidency, won by Donald Trump. The average of polls prior to the election showed only 0.1% difference between the two candidates, 0.1%. And Trump actually did better than that, winning 50% of the vote and leading Kamala Harris by 2 percentage points. Trump in each election has done a little better than the polls suggested, and the pollsters kept trying to adjust to account for whatever that was, but it turned out once again that was the pattern. NPR summarized the polls as follows: Harris and Biden before her lagged, with Latinos and younger voters all through the campaign cycle. Trump made inroads with younger men, and especially younger men of color. Trump surged after first getting in, but then Harris surged after she first got in, but then her leads evaporated after a month of negative advertising from Trump and his allies. The economy and immigration were vital to voters, and they preferred Trump on each of those issues. Toward the very end of the race, the polls found that the gender gap might not be as wide as earlier polls suggested. So that was the summary from the NPR. I looked at the election day polls. They claimed that they talked with 220,000 people after they had voted. I find that astonishing. But some of the trends that I found, certainly Trump succeeded in part because inflation was a major issue. I'm reminded of 1992 when we had a mild recession, which had ended, but we had a sluggish economy and slow job growth. Bill Clinton's mantra was, "It's the economy, stupid." That was enough for him to win the White House over President George H.W. Bush. Another example was 1980 when we had a brief recession and Ronald Reagan beat President Jimmy Carter. Similarly, inflation had largely been conquered in 2024, but the Biden administration was still credited with it. That leads me to conclude that mild economic problems lead to major political problems. Even though presidents can't do much about the economy, the Federal Reserve has the responsibility of balancing inflation and employment. Trump argued that the economy was better when he was president, and there was a sharp difference in perceptions. 82% of the Kamala Harris voters said that their financial situation was better than 4 years ago, and 81% of the Trump voters said their financial situation was better 4 years ago. So people's perceptions of their financial situation was affected a lot by their by their preference, or vice versa. The second major issue that Trump pushed was immigration. Trump always saw a problem with immigrants. In 2015, when he first started, he began by saying that Mexico was sending rapists and criminals to the United States. He proposed a border wall to reduce the number of immigrants. Then the Biden administration was judged to be more lenient, and we had an increased number of undocumented immigrants, and that began to produce enormous problems for cities like New York and Chicago, because immigrants were sent to or moved to those states. But rather interesting, among the voters in 2024, 40% said immigrants should be deported. 40%. 56% said that they should be offered a chance at legal status to stay in the country. But 40% want the immigrants deported. Voters gave a slight edge to Trump in handling immigration and in handling the economy. Both candidates received strong support from voters who identified with their party. But rather interesting, in this election, in the turnout, Republicans were more numerous than Democrats. The same sort of thing that we found in Boone County. The Republicans constituted 35% of the voters on election day, and Democrats were 31% of the voters. One interpretation of that is that Democrats did not turn out as well as they had in 2020. Harris had an advantage among people who decided in September and October. Trump had an advantage in the people who decided in the very last week before the election. And overwhelmingly, people said they had voted the same as they had voted in 2020, or at least the same as they remember voting in 2020. So that raises the interesting question: how could Democrats have changed the result? Well, certainly one thing, Democrats were handicapped because of the late change of candidates. If Joe Biden had recognized his failure earlier, Democrats could have had a primary in which various candidates were tested. And Kamala Harris would have won that primary, but as Nancy Pelosi said, she would have been a stronger candidate if she had gone through the primary. And in addition, one of the things that I think is that if the Democrats had had a primary, there would have been a lot more emphasis upon Trump's age. He is the oldest man to ever assume the presidency, but all of the concern was about Biden's age, and that there was so much concern about Biden's age that there was not concern about Trump's age. Let me turn to the question of, okay, is Trump going to be as bad as many of us had feared? I think that the appointments that he's making to his cabinet indicate the answer is probably yes. He's moved swiftly to establish his cabinet. We are a little over a week past the election, and most of the cabinet has been announced already. Some of the names are really surprising, and some indicators that Trump will be coming out with some of his worst traits. most surprising name, I guess, is Matt Gaetz for Attorney General. He's been on the edge of respectability time and again. He was under ethics investigation for his conduct, which included allegations of sexual misconduct and illicit drug use, sharing inappropriate images or videos on the House floor, misusing state identification records, converting campaign funds to personal use, and accepting impermissible gifts under House rules. And he's supposed to be the Attorney General. Already, some senators are suggesting he may not receive Senate approval, although I suspect that Republican senators will follow Trump's wishes. Matt Gaetz immediately, as soon as he was appointed, he resigned from the House. The Ethics Committee was scheduled to release its report today. And because he's no longer in the House, they will not be releasing the report. The question is whether the report will be leaked. But it's certainly by his resignation, he doesn't come. And one of the things that I realized is a possibility is having resigned. If by some reason, if he did not get approval or did not get an appointment to be Attorney General, then of course Governor DeSantis could appoint him to the Senate seat being vacated by Marco Rubio, who will be Secretary of State. So we could have him back in the Senate. Another surprise is Pete Hegseth as Secretary of Defense. His background is he's an author, and he's the host of a weekend program on Fox News that Trump watches. He was a junior officer in the Army. He has no experience managing a large organization. But in his latest book, he complains that woke generals and the leaders of the elite service academies have left the military dangerously weak and effeminate by promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion. Hegseth has pushed for making the military more lethal, and he says that allowing women to serve in combat roles hurts that effort. And so if he becomes the Secretary of Defense, we will probably have some change in regulations there. In 2019, Hegseth urged Trump to pardon U.S. service members who had been accused of war crimes, and Trump did pardon one of them. Robert Kennedy will be Secretary of Health and Human Services. Trump has said, quote, "I'm going to let him go wild on health. I'm going to let him go wild on the food. I'm going to let him go wild on medicines." And as you know, Kennedy is a vaccine skeptic, and he will be heading the Department of Health and Human Services. Tulsi Gabbard is another appointment. She's to be the Director of National Intelligence. She was a Democratic Congresswoman from Hawaii, and then ran for the Democratic nomination for president in 2020. Then she switched to support Trump and the Republicans. In 2019, Hillary Clinton said that Russia was backing Miss Tulsi Gabbard, and that she was a Kremlin favorite who was supported by its propaganda apparatus. After Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022, Tulsi Gabbard posted a video on social media repeating a false claim pushed by the Kremlin that the United States was funding biological weapons lab in Ukraine. The post prompted Senator Mitt Romney, Republican in Utah, to say that Ms. Gabbard was, quote, parroting false Russian propaganda, close quote. Gabbard has also been supportive of Bashar al-Assad, the dictator of Syria, and she is to be appointed as the director of national intelligence. Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy are to head a Department of Government Efficiency, which will root out waste and corruption. Senator Elizabeth Warren said, quote, the Office of Government Efficiency is off to a great start with split leadership. 2 people to do the work of 1 person. Yeah, this seems really efficient. End of quote from Elizabeth Warren. Both Musk and Ramaswamy have companies which have very large contracts with the federal government, so they may not find waste and corruption in the departments which fund them. One interesting possibility is that perhaps Trump is putting them in meaningless positions to push them out of the way. It's possible that they could have a major effect, but it's also possible that by putting the 2 of them with a split responsibility, that they will accomplish nothing, and that's what will happen. Now, will these people, certain people, get approved by the Senate? That's questionable. The Senate will have a Republican majority, and very likely the Republicans will support Trump's appointment. It's dangerous for Republicans to not support President Trump. President Trump has recognized very early that these are not likely to be popular with the Republican senators, and so he has asked that for recess appointments. And under the rules, if there is to be a recess, it has to be at least 10 days, and there has to be both the Senate and the House to go into recess. The Senate has been avoiding this for a number of years by holding pro forma sessions every 3 days, and they go into session, and maybe they have the prayer, and then they end the session and come back in 3 days. And so they have avoided it going into a recess, especially so presidents couldn't do this. So will Trump convince them to go into recess? It appears that there may be enough objections that some senators would want to, particularly to look at Tulsi Gabbard, Robert Kennedy, and Matt Gaetz as members of the cabinet. But I heard last night that there is a provision that if one house wants to go into recess and the other doesn't, that it's up to the president. It's never been used at all, but there is that provision available, and so that could mean that the House of Representatives could say, we're going into recess, and then the president can say, and the Senate would say, no, we're not going into recess, and the president would get to do that, to get to declare that they were in recess for the 10 days. And then he would make a recess appointments of everybody and in his cabinet and all the other major appointments. And they would be, as I understand it, allowed to serve for about 2 years. So anyway, that's my hope is that Trump does not try to stay in office after his 4-year, after his term. So I'm looking forward to J.D. Vance being the next Republican candidate for president. Oh, happy thought. Let me open it to questions and comments.
Okay, who's got a question or a comment? And there are quite a few in the chat here.
Oh, okay. Let me go to the chat.
I guess the first one up there was with regard to, let me see. Oh, first it was about the anti-gambling sports betting group. Why do you think they pulled their ads?
Oh, I think they reached an agreement that Caesars wanted some part of the action, and I suspect that they got it, an agreement there.
Sue or Herb?
David, some pundits, some writers in several good places have been talking about an apparently growing realignment of the party's electoral turnout and voting, with the rising importance of an degree of education and Democrats' loss of penetration in the working class or the below average horsepower. What are your reactions to those comments? I'm sure you've seen them.
Well, we did see that sort of a pattern in which the Harris had a 13-point advantage among college graduates, and Trump had a similar advantage among people who did not go to college. And union households split narrowly for Harris. I found that fascinating, that the union used to be strong supporters. Union voters used to be strong supporters of Democrats, and now it's more or less of a 50-50 split. Trump has been very successful in appealing to young men of color, and he has made some moves there, and we seem to be having a distinct party realignment with the college graduates voting Democratic, and here 13 points, and in that the whites supported Trump 57 to 41%. Very strong margin among white voters. Harris had the black voters 85 to 13%, but that is a lower proportion than we've been seeing in previous elections. So I think, yes, we're well on our way toward a realignment here.
David, I want to just say on a personal note, would you please call Herb and me after this is over or very soon? We have
Sure.
something separate from here, but we need to talk to you.
Okay.
I read an analysis that said that the voters that you would have expected Democrats to turn out at a higher than normal percentage didn't turn out. Turned out a lower percentage than last time. And that would be the educated voters, the women concerned about abortion, whereas the less engaged voters who tended to vote for Trump turned out at a higher than normal level. Do you have any feeling for why that might have been?
That's an interesting pattern. If that is the situation, no, that's a good question. Maybe somebody else has it. Or do you have it?
No, I don't. I think a lot of us thought that even though the polls looked like they were even, that the turnout would favor Democrats in a way that it hadn't, in previous elections.
I think
I have a historical parallel, and that's in the rise of fascism in Germany, that Social Democrats became blasé as the radicals became a lot more insistent.
I along that line, I think it's both racial, and I think it's also not wanting a woman in power. And I think those contributed significantly.
Sarah?
What Sue said, yes, race, gender, and I just this week have heard 3 different people I know personally who I think are fairly involved, educated Democrats. They voted, but I've heard them say, I really didn't think it was even going to be close. So I wonder how many Democrats thought we were just going to trounce Trump, and they just thought, other people have got this, I don't need to show up. I'm kind of starting to think that was part of it too.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that. David, question? David Robinson?
No, I just had it all runs. I mean, maybe we've had fascist elections before, but this one, if you look at the historical patterns, is a kind of classic fascist pattern of regular organizations falling off and a new unrelated. I mean, if you think about Trump as a Republican leader, it's just not, he's not a Republican. It does look like fascism to me.
I guess I would question whether half of the people really are worse off now economically than they were 4 years ago, because wages have gone up. 4 years ago, we were in the middle of a pandemic. There was a lot of unemployment, and it seems like there's a gap between reality and perception.
Well, there is clearly the pattern that groceries are higher, and people shop for groceries regularly, and those are distinctly higher. And though the wages may, in a lot of cases, have been keeping up, the people are seeing that more clearly in the case of wages. They speak also of gas prices, but generally gas prices are fairly reasonable right now.
But when Trump left office, they were like $1.89 because nobody could go anywhere.
So can I shove my question in because it's relevant?
Yeah, go ahead, David. Dave?
I asked it way early. Did Professor Leuthold say in what counties Proposition 8 carried? Which counties, how many? I mean, if the working class has whatever bullshit, about workers are all upset about, the cost of living and inflation and everything. Where do we see that in the counties in Missouri?
Well, I haven't looked specifically at the Proposition A by county. I would assume that the pattern, this was in essence a Democratic measure. So Democratic counties were passing it, and Republican counties were more cautious about it. So that would be the pattern I would expect on it, but I didn't look at it that specifically.
Yeah, Scott, did you have a question? You're muted, Scott.
Yeah, no, I saw that. It was just a side comment because there's been a lot of talk about why, say, Hispanic men voted for Trump as opposed to going with Harris. I was talking to a friend of mine in Pennsylvania. She's African American. She's an attorney. And she said her church was working in a poor Hispanic neighborhood. And she found one of the gentlemen she was talking with was going to vote for Trump. So she asked him why. And his reasoning was that he's voting for Trump because he doesn't want any more illegal immigrants to come in, maybe even immigrants in general, because he only has a crumb and he doesn't want to have to be forced to share the crumb that he's got. And apparently a lot of people felt the same way. They did not want to share the little they've got with others. And to me, that was a big surprise.
John Leguizamo has done a couple of programs on podcasts and on television about that very issue. If you're familiar with John Leguizamo. Yeah.
No, I'm not.
Okay. Yeah, it's a thing.
And there was this is Kathy, there was an interesting interview on NPR, I think it was the night before maybe, with Hispanic minister talking about how Hispanics are becoming more evangelical and why they voted for Trump. And he also talked about how anti-Black the Latino community is becoming. So that may well have been another factor. Anti-Black people, that's what I'm trying to say.
Herb, Sue?
In addition to Kathy, in addition to those good things you said, it's also the case that many, many Hispanics are Catholic and have different views on abortion than do the rest. You can see it on the Springboard. But David, on another matter, there seem to be two competing lines of thought that can come out of this for democratic planning, and we damn well better figure this out and do some planning. One is the one which you were talking about. You talked about at the beginning and then dropped. Biden's holding on too long. The other was this line about, well, there is a shift in the demography. I wonder if we could go back to talking more about the costs of what was I heard all the time growing up, familiar with it by the time I was in junior high school, as the effectiveness trap in politics and other kinds of leadership. That if you do a good job, and you know you did a good job, you're tempted to think that there really isn't anybody else who can do it better, and so you should stay on. And it's not just presidents, and it's not just senators and congressmen and people in business, and hell, even some professors. What's the weight of these things that denying the possibility for a more balanced choice for a candidate, Democratic candidate, whether it's competition, experience, and learning versus the issue of the shift in the coalition as the thing we must first attend to and worry about for the next election?
Well, certainly Joe Biden, he had talked about being a transitional president but he had, I think, a very successful term as president, and rather interesting that he didn't recognize the problems that he had. When he was interviewed by George Stephanopoulos after the debate, he said he had not watched the debate. And I found the debate appalling. Well, my daughter came in to the room after about 10 minutes, and she asked, "How's it going?" And I said, neither of these people should be selected as president. Mm-hmm. and I felt that Biden did very poorly. He never watched it himself. It seems to me if he had watched it, he would have been appalled, as the rest of us were. But he wanted to hold on and wasn't recognizing his comparative weakness. And he apparently felt very confident that he was, he'd beaten Trump before and that he could do so again. And that was, I found very, I found surprising that he wasn't able to.
Follow up. Is this an argument, good argument for term limits and mandatory retirement rules for a lot of things?
Yes.
People aren't good judges of themselves, I've noticed, even myself, about myself.
In the case of judges, we have some states which have no retirement ages. A lot of states which require retirement of judges in their 70s, and that seems to be reflected the different views about elderly people and how long they should continue on. Apparently, now with Trump to be in office, some people are suggesting that Clarence Thomas and I'm blocking on the other name, that they could both, the conservative, right-wing conservative on the court, Justice Alito, that they could both retire and be and have a successor appointed by Trump. But I think it was Alito who announced, "I have no plans to retire." So they will probably continue, although and there was also the question of Justice Sotomayor, who is the oldest liberal on the court. She's 70, and some people were suggesting to her, and she has diabetes. Some people were suggesting to her that she should resign while Biden could appoint a successor. But I think we, in those cases, we have the Ruth Bader Ginsburg problem that justices see themselves as making significant impact and still sharp as can be, and so they don't want to retire from the position of power that they have.
Well, it's at 1 o'clock, and I thank you, David, and thank you everybody for participating. What we've scheduled for December 13th, and I want to at least be part of that discussion, is just a Muleskinners, only Muleskinners plus any other interested Democrats, is just talk about these issues, about the state of the country, where we go from here. Is it a solvable political problem? Is it more of a systemic problem? And to what degree should we be concerned that half of the people are willing to vote for somebody like Donald Trump? and all those issues surrounding that. So I hope, and I will be gone between now and then, but hope to continue this discussion on the 13th of December. And thank you very much for informing us.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, Muleskinners meeting, business meeting for today.